Last time on Build Guide for Gundam Breaker Mobile. Well, gee, they managed to do it. So all I have to do is spend $10,000. And then I have to just level up some crappy builds, and maybe I'll get through it. Alright everyone, so this weekend, some serious shit went down. Right after my last video, they posted the other 10 laps of the battle circuit. And not too long after that, good human being and friend of the channel, Smiley T1, finished his latest guide, which you can find on the Gundam Battle Reddit about how to beat the whole battle circuit. Now at this point, I had a pretty hard call to make. When Smiley's guide initially came out, only about 100 people worldwide had managed to clear the battle circuit. But a day or two later, those numbers were going up pretty impressively. Now, similarly, that day I was playing the arena, and my arena rank was actually somehow 12th in the world. Now, it later went down to like 5,000, and maybe there was like not a ton of people playing the arena that day, but for this one shining moment, I was in the top 20 players in the world for the arena, and that filled me with all kinds of unnatural confidence. So after that, I had this big epiphany, a flashback to August when the first Inferno battle came out. See, pretty much the first Inferno battle I played actually took me close to 3 days. I had to make a custom variant of my main melee build just to clear it, and then on the second one, I also had to design a completely unique shooter build that was literally only useful for clearing that one Inferno mission. But then, on the third Inferno mission, I made a perfect build that was able to carry me for almost every single other Inferno mission that came after that. So, if the battle circuit is about to become a new normal part of the game from this point on, well that sucks because it puts me in a position where I have to be really real and realize that if I'm not prepared to handle this battle circuit, I'm not going to be able to handle the next battle circuit, and I'm not going to be able to move forward in the game anymore. So, unfortunately, I decided to bite the bullet. I declared all-out war on defeating the battle circuit. And what followed after that was not pretty. I started playing the battle circuit at 5 o'clock on Friday, and I didn't finish round 20 of the battle circuit until midnight on Sunday, almost 3 days later. I pretty much stopped my entire life and only did the bare necessities like eating and sleeping. Now, as I mentioned before, there is no way to get through the battle circuit unless you're prepared to spend money. Or unless you were a psychic and you knew the battle circuit was coming for a year and you've been preparing for it every day up till now. But anyway, so as a result, I spent $80 on sale Haro chips, which I then entirely wasted on energy restores just to get in-game money to upgrade all my suits to build 20 viable builds to beat the battle circuit. This guide I'm about to show you is going to make all of that work seem so easy because you're not going to see it. But be aware that for over 76 hours of my real life, I was grinding, I was dying, I was trying to get in-game money to put builds together, I used up all my items, I had over 1,000 skip tickets saved up, and I used literally all of them. Like, in general, like, there was so much trial and error going on while I had to learn the boss's patterns and also troubleshoot the problems I got out of Smiley's builds. Which takes me to my next topic. So, first things first, Smiley's guide is very much available on Reddit. You can check it out yourself if you want to cross-examine what I'm saying now. Now, what I'll say, the best things about Smiley's guide, it does these two things amazingly well. Smiley did so much hard work coming up with the absolute bare minimum builds you need to clear these stages and times. And he also successfully identified the 60 EX skills you need to beat it. So once again, from here on out, if I express any stress at all with the things going forward that happen in this play, those things are not reflective of Smiley the person, but they are reflective of my personal gameplay quirks and how those intermingled with me trying to follow his guide with the game parts that I've managed to collect up in the past year. Now, that being said, as I noticed in the first version of his guide, there are a few places where his builds utilize duplicate parts, which I personally have none of because I always sell or I always upgrade all of my duplicate parts right away. Second, and this is another personal quirk for myself, I hate Gundam Seed. I don't know if anyone wants me to elaborate on why, but please let me know. That will be another video in the future. But because I hate Gundam Seed, I have never went out of my way to pull any Gundam Seed themed parts. So anytime there's a build involving seed parts, that wasn't going to work for me, and I had to figure out a very clever workaround. So here's sort of what happened in regards to me interpreting his guide and playing it in my style of gameplay. Now, on the first 10 rounds, I didn't follow his guide very closely. I played things pretty loosely because there had been a bunch of different people who got through the first 10 rounds, and I wanted to just experiment with all these different builds. But in general, I did try to follow Smiley's guide as closely as I could from the 10th round up, and most of my builds are going to be stronger than the ones he presented because in my 1 year of playing GBM, I have been leveling up as many parts as I could manage, and also to make up the difference in skill between Smiley and me, the one thing I did notice that got me into a lot of trouble was that a lot of Smiley suits have marks on like uncommon and not good parts, and I fucking hate marks. Marks are full-on randomized gambling. And that being said, because marks are so freaking rare, I usually try to save them all for my main suit. Now, I realized at some point that it's likely that what Smiley did was he had a backlog of saved marks, and then he applied them onto his minor suits during this battle circuit run. So I did the same as much as I could, but I just didn't have that many free marks to use. Now, that being said, on the bright side, those builds that Smiley figured out, they are the absolute bare minimum of what you need to beat the stage to time. So if you plan ahead, you can soup them all up. But on that note, you need to know what not to do as well. When I went over his guide, I made kind of a loose notepad list of parts that I needed to specifically save for the later runs, and I got into some major trouble doing some replays when I noticed that some of those critical parts ended up getting subparted on random builds without me noticing. I also had to use the extra build slots in my build set to pre-assemble some builds. Right now I still have my builds for 19 and 20 hanging out. 19 and 20 ended up being the hardest rounds in the circuit. They're both really brutal. I didn't think 19 was that hard when I beat it the first time, but then when I re-examined it to try and get my score better, I had a lot of difficulty with it. And 20 was very, very serious until I made a build that worked for it. My current build for 20 makes it seem like a cakewalk, but please be aware that 20 is literally the worst stage this game has ever come up with. And you need an absolute fully fleshed out, full power Gundam just to get through that round by itself. So now here is the round by round play by play of what happened when I did the battle circuit. So in round 1, I rebuilt Smiley's suit pretty much exactly. But later on, when I was trying to grind the time down even more, I replaced the Boundock head with my Junk Strike Gundam head. The most important thing here was using the Shield Throw EX skill and then saving the Excalibur to kill the Epion. Round 2, I also followed Smiley's guide pretty closely. Now, the most important thing for this round was that when you build a mobile fighter, it has close combat. And I ran into some minor grief here when, in a few other places, Smiley in his guide uses the Burning Gundam legs a lot, and I've absolutely never had the luck to pull those parts. I made do with the Master Gundam legs, which were just as good and an appropriate substitute. So this stage, what's important is G Gundam EX skills, and the theme is close combat and mobile fighter. Now, round 3 is the first skill hack round. The important things to do here are get off pro tag in close combat. And then you need to use the anchor shot to stun the bad guys so you can kill them with your melee. Smiley's build also uses a weird Biolant chest, which I'm pretty sure is the Spear Biolant from the capsule coins. Again, I consider the capsule coin parts duplicates too, so I usually don't keep them either. So I ended up plopping on my G-Razor head to make up for the difference in melee power and to try and survive here. Again, the most important thing here is using anchor shot to stun guys. Now, round 4 is a round that I was able to finish in about 30 seconds, which is very cool. Smiley's build used low Guile, who I don't have. I don't go out of my way for seed characters. So I substituted that guy with freaking Domonkashi, the King of Hearts. And in this round, everything was to get the Epion out and to hit him with the GM drive. And that's probably the reason my score here is so good. So the most important thing here was setting up Transam. So round 5 messed me up really hard. I personally found Smiley's guide to be almost useless for this one, because he gives me another build with Burning Gundam legs, which again I don't have, and Shinaska too, which is a C character, don't have him either. So I replaced Shin with Lauren Sichek, and I built a full-on powerhouse build with all the parts from the Epion and the Unicorn that I thought I could get away with wasting in this round. The most important thing in this round is to build a melee powerhouse, and my suit here kind of became a fake Epion. So round 6 was one of the first rounds that full-on demoralized me and made me realize how hard the battle circuit was. Before I played with Smiley's guide, this was as far as I was able to get on my own merits. And this is the first really bad switch mode stage. Now, I don't have a clue how Smiley cleared that with his build. Like, that's insane to me. But he had a lot of parts here that I didn't. This was probably one of the stages I replayed the most too. I beat it the first time with pretty much a remake of my melee main, just to get past it. I whittled down my score with a couple of different configurations until my confidence was a little higher. By the way, sometimes in the battle circuit, you may have to let your time go up just so you can unpair a part from a stage if you need a part for another stage. Because, for example, in one run on the stage, someone had suggested that I use the Moon Gundam Cycle Plate, and yeah, that kind of worked, but later I came back without it, because I realized I just needed to save that for some of the harder missions. And then the most important thing here was to quickly dispatch the Zaku and the Gundam, and then deal the Epion with Brinicle. So yeah, the most important thing here is just stabbing Epion in the face. My theme this time was the Patchwork Exia Dark Matter. Now round 7 was swift. I finished this one in 27 seconds, which is probably my all-time fastest run for the entire battle circuit. Smiley's guide recommended that I make a pseudo-fake Barbatos, which was easy peasy for me, because the build Barbatos was one of my main units for the last year. So my version of his build ended up being super OP compared to his version. And the EX skill choices that he picked out for this one were freaking perfect. The most important thing on this round, deadly EX skills. My theme, fake Barbatos. Round 8. Round 8 was the high firepower round. And my build here was exactly the same build as Smiley had. Although, interestingly, this was one of the very rare instances where my build was weaker than his version. And despite that, I was still able to win. Now, that being said, his time was much better than mine, so maybe that's to be expected with the better stats. I might be able to improve things here if I try it again with a little bit more power. So the most important thing here was that the Alvaron's back is completely chaotic and unpredictable. You need to have it hit as many guys as it can, and a lot of times the Zaku might kill you while you're inside it. This gave me some really bad flashbacks to the last time I used the Alvaron's back. Anyway, the theme here was an Artemis Zaku 3 kit bash. Now, round 9 was another round where I just couldn't get my melee as strong as Smiley, but otherwise my overall build was stronger. Now, that being said, the build here using the Star Burning and the Susanoo legs, that was completely genius yet again. But the main reason I couldn't match Smiley was his very interesting choice of using the SD Knight Gundam sword, which I don't have again because the SD Knight Gundam is a joke and I never pull them. Now, I'd be curious if I could push this build farther because Smiley's time was twice as fast as mine, and my build for this one, quite frankly, did not play out ideally. Now, the most important thing for this round again is setting up Trans Am and having a very strong physical fighter. Now, after round 10, there's a stopgap, and a lot of people get stuck here because this is where the battles take a turn for the worse and get so much more serious. Now, in round 10, I built a weaker version of my main build Exia. I'm going to call this version the retro build Exia because it's basically what my build Exia looked like back in June. Smiley's build of it used the Wing Zero backpick here, and even though I only have one of those, I thought I might need it elsewhere. So I swapped it for the double X backpack. And ultimately, with my current builds, I still have never bothered to use the Wing Zero backpack yet, but I think Smiley's build was trying to set up on Feather Dive. Instead, mine sets up on Bisect, and, you know, same. No big difference. Now, the most important thing for this one is you need a melee attack over 16,000, and you need a sure kill EX skill to take down Epion. Again, my theme here was Retro Exia. Round 11 was another really tough one. I followed Smiley's guide as closely as possible here again, but the build here he made was anchored on the strength of having the Epion legs, which is another super rare part I've never had the luck to build. My Epion sits sadly using fake, not cool legs. Now, I made do using the Denial Gundam legs as my next strongest melee legs available, and the initial run of this that I beat the first time used a lot of pieces of the Arch Gundam, but I swapped those out because they were unnecessary, and I made a much cooler version of this during my live stream that actually trimmed down my timing here significantly. Now, the last significant thing you need to know about this one is that the Lion Sword from the Tryon 3 chest has to be at point blank range to work. So the main idea of this build is just to set up Epion and lead him into a bad encounter with the Lion Sword. Smiley's build was kind of an arch lion. My new one is just kind of a mobile fighter lion. Now, round 12 is one of the absolute worst stages in the entire battle circuit. If I had to say what was the hardest stage, I would say it's this one. So I was stuck here for the longest freaking time, because you're expected in this one to be able to kill everything without using EX skills. And this is the stage where if you haven't figured out how to fight in the game manually, you will not be able to proceed past here. Now, Smiley's build in the guide this time was kind of a total disaster too. The only parts of his build I had were the Gyan head, the beam ribbon, and the offense up Build Gundam Mark II parts. And the Build Gundam Mark II parts have horrible base stats on them, so you need to use a red part on the arms to make them work. And then the Gyan head is also a very weak part. Now, in my initial run of this, I had it subbed onto the Unicorn head, but I was able to later beat it in a replay without using the Unicorn head. Now, Smiley's build is a mess here because it uses a ton of rare parts, and I just didn't have any of them. The Sinanju torso didn't have, New Gundam legs didn't have, Burning backpack didn't have, XAC cloak did not have. So I just had to take away what was the most important thing out of Smiley's build and build my own thing here. My build ended up being a much stronger Gundam in a lot of different ways, and I also managed to get close combat to pop. So the one important thing in this stage again is the only EX skills you can use are combat boosters to keep your melee extra high. Then from there on out, you have to use the beam ribbon to just beat down all your enemies while somehow surviving. Also, Smiley's build used a really high melee defense, which makes sense, but I was able to clear it just using a really high melee attack. So again, the most important thing here is knowing how to fight with your hands and using the beam ribbon to its fullest. My theme here was Ghost Gyan. Round 13 was so bad. So Smiley's guide recommended that I use the Wing Zero head this time, so I did. But I foolishly forgot at this point that Smiley uses duplicate parts. And the Wing Zero, its head is the rarest head in the freaking game, and the fact he had a duplicate is like mind-blowing. But the Wing Zero head is also critical for his build in round 20. Anyway, I literally could only beat the stage once, and because of that, the Wing Zero head got stuck here, because I could never beat the stage if I didn't use it. Now, in this round, beam attacks are boosted super high, so it's pretty much begging you to use a shooter build, and the Wing Zero head boosts the beam attacks substantially. Now, in this round, my build ended up being a lot stronger than Smiley's, but Smiley's build also has an altered high mega launcher, which I don't have, and that's a tall order, and I don't even know what it's doing for him. But anyway, long story short, I made do with the TR5's long blade rifle instead, and then I used some other ed parts to try and make up the difference. Now, the stage was brutally difficult, and I think the difference in power between my build and Smiley's was the main reason I had such a rough time. Again, the most important thing on this one is building a shooter build, and I guess using the Wing Zero head. The suit I built was kind of a beam tank Zaku. Now, I think it speaks at this point how much I've been traumatized by the battle circuit, that my descriptions of what happened in these rounds are getting longer and longer as we go into the last few rounds. Now, round 14 was surprisingly fun and easy though. Smiley came up with a really nice build this time. His was based around the God Gundam, and using the Chokyuha Danedan to kill weaker grunt units, and then full-on blasting the Epyon to death with the Sekiha Tenkyoken. In this stage, I used almost the exact same build, and followed his original recipe pretty closely, but I did make some cool substitutions on my part to boost the power even farther. The biggest change in my build was since I did not have the Gundam Versago chest, and my experiments with the GM2 legs made me realize they were an absolute liability to my survival, I substituted out both of them for the Unicorn's chest with NTD. Now, I realize this is a very rare part that almost no one has, but it worked out great for me. The most important thing in this round is using the EX skills perfectly, and the theme here was Fake God Gundam. Now, round 15 was another hot disaster. Smiley's build here is very eclectic. What's important here is using the composite armor to build a rapid shooter build, just like my main build for the Inferno missions. But while doing that in switch mode, that means you also have to max out your shot defense, and as far as both my build and Smiley's were concerned, that needs to pull this stage off, you need a minimum shot defense of 19,000. So Smiley's build is a freak of nature as far as I'm concerned. His is built mostly around new Gundam parts, which I don't have a very good track record of pulling. Like, my luck with the new Gundam has been ultra bad, with both the good looking one and the ugly one. And then on top of that, Smiley's build has a maxed out Santa Capua head, which was a real surprise for me. Now, in my own game, I hadn't done that much with the new Gundam, and I consider the Santa Capua a joke unit. But I had done a lot with the full armor new, so I subbed in all the parts I could spare of that to make this build work. I also subbed in any parts I could get from the code Phi as well that I thought would be useful to get that intensely high order of the 19,000 shot defense. And I also have to really stress for this build that you need to have a red part in the arms and the legs, or otherwise you can't get good stats and good EX skills at the same time. Anyway, my version of this build was okay, but this is still a really, really hard stage. Again, the most important thing here is special defense over 19,000. My theme, and Smiley's theme, was some kind of new Gundam. Now, lap 16 was another really bad run. The situation here is that the physical attacks are boosted, and the goal is to come in with a physical shooter and go to town like Santa Claus. Now somehow, even though my build was very similar to Smiley's, my version barely worked. I pushed the shot attack as high as I could, and I also managed to pop off Ace Excel and high firepower. But this stage is just so brutally difficult, and I know Smiley pulled off some total witchcraft using Lila Mira Lila, who has a special skill that makes physical attacks hit harder, but I used Troa instead because I wanted the high firepower boost and I wanted the overall higher stats. So again, the most important thing here is building an all-out physical shooter build, and my suit became a ghetto heavy arms. Now round 17 was a surprisingly easy break for me. Smiley's build here was really decent again. It again depends on using the Chokyuhao Denedan to mow down enemies, and then go for a final kill with the Sengoku Astrae's hidden arm attack. But since I don't like seed suits, I didn't have the Sengoku Astrae's arm. So instead I used the Master Gundam instead, because that's more thematically concise anyway. And I also ended up using the Sinanju's VMAX as a second very reliable EX skill, because the Chokyuhao Denedan wouldn't always hit right, and while I get the idea of using the GM2's legs to pop combat stats, that strategy just doesn't work out for me because I feel like the loss in stats is too substantial to live with. So again, the most important thing here again was to build a G Gundam-esque EX skill suit with, this time around, a Master Gundam theme. So then round 18. Round 18 was another surprisingly easy one. And I think the later rounds might have felt easier to me because I was now used to what I was seeing in these rounds. And at this point I was fighting with my full strength instead of trying to use scraps and leftover parts. So Smiley's build was designed to hit people hard with the Iron Impact and then set up sure kill attacks using the Phantom Zero and the Shining Finger Sword. Now, I used a different Shining Finger for my build, and I replaced the Justice Gundam backpack with the Banshee Norns, which I was very lucky to pull literally a day or two ago. Now, both of our builds are based around the Epion chest and the power that gives. The most important thing in this one is using Iron Impact to wreck fools and Shining Finger. Oh, but wait, update. So in my live stream, I actually built an even better version of this because I had difficulty using Iron Impact and waiting for it to come off. And instead I used the Destiny Shield, which I happened to randomly get from a Sokai event. That being said, the AX attack on it, I have no clue what it did, but it made instant mincemeat of anything I used it on. Now, round 19 was one of the two rounds I had pre-built heading into the formal battle circuit run. And I knew that I needed my strongest shooter build to make this work. I knew I was going to use the Strike Nor backpack and Hero Yui here. Now, interestingly, Smiley's build uses the Zanbuster X2 as a red part, and I expected his build to take advantage of it, but his did not. But I redded out the Zanbuster 2 and was able to use it to pop off H6L and high firepower while staying under the power banner, which I believe is what the Zanbuster is for. Now, again, the most important things here in Smiley's build were utilizing the EX skills and the Zanbuster, and the fact you need to be using a shooter. But once again, when I got down to it, I was able to make a bunch of fun substitutions in my build, and I was able to make my version a lot stronger than his version. Now, part of me wants to say I coasted on this one, but my version of this level took over 3 minutes and Smiley did it in 1. And when I tried to trim my time down, I had extreme difficulty. So then finally we come to the fully realized nightmare of round 20. Now ironically, despite planning for 3 days to go with Smiley's build on this, I ended up having to do something completely different because Smiley's build just didn't really work out for my game style. Now the most important thing on Smiley's build was having a red part on the head. And Smiley used the Wing Zero head, but I had foolishly locked my Wing Zero head into an earlier stage. So instead, I used the Unicorn head, which I was able to unlock from stage 12. Now, the stats on the Unicorn head are just a little bit below the Wing head, so overall it was comparable. And then you need a red part on the chest too, because the crossbone beam gun is the best weapon for the stage, but the crossbone part is weak. So we both decided that the best thing here was use the turn X to make up for the overall low base stats on the crossbone chest and to just buff the whole thing all the way through. Now, still using the beam gun as a critical EX skill is critical to actually pass the stage. Then Smiley's build utilized the Gundam Versago arms and the heavy arm legs. Now, to fully flesh out a standard Inferno mission style rapid shooter build, those are good ideas, but I didn't have those parts. Now, I very dumbly wasted 2 of my 4-star part tickets to get my hands on them and try them out, but when I did try them out for my build, they weren't really working for me as well as they did for Smiley. Now, I'm assuming that maybe his versions had been super upgraded because he was relying on them that way. And anyway, Smiley's build has a 4th red part in the form of new Hyper Bazooka. So by now I completely ran out of upgrade items, and the only thing I could do was utilize the last red part I had access to, my Zeta Gundam backpack, which does boost shooting. And then the only other thing is that Smiley's build had a shot attack of 24,000, which is so serious. I could not reach that no matter what I did. But I still managed to beat the stage and have a pretty easy time about it, having my personal build having a shot attack of over 21,000. Now anyway, so like I said, Smiley's build just didn't gel with me. So instead of using the Versago and the heavy arms parts, I made a really hardcore alternative full armor Unicorn build instead. Because the Unicorn is just an absolute powerhouse, and with the beam gun attack working in tandem with it, I was able to actually clear the battle circuit. And oh my god, it was a nightmare, and oh my god, it took me forever. So yeah, that's how I beat the battle circuit. And that doesn't take into consideration the $80 worth of grinding my real money into in-game money to buy upgrades to actually construct those builds. Now, was it worth it? I don't know. It was stressful as hell. Like, I pretty much only beat it out of peer pressure. Now, maybe the investment will pay off if there's another battle circuit later, and I can reuse some of these builds to make even more builds, but I don't know if that's going to happen. And for what it's worth, I initially finished with only 8 minutes left on the clock, although at the time of this video, I have very triumphantly managed to grind my time to a little higher than 14 minutes. So I thought I was going to finish with the full 20, but those last few rounds are so tough that they really drained my time out of me. And for what it's worth, to get the time under 20 minutes means you can't waste more than 1 minute per round unless you do a few rounds where you're ultra fast and you buy yourself some leeway. Oh, also in terms of loot, I got 3 pieces of the Valkyrie Gundam. Yay! But again, that wasn't really worth it either. You can get all the loot if you can at least finish with up to 19 minutes. The 20th minute is really just for bragging rights. Now, on the bright side, since I have finished it, grinding up my time is a much less stressful and easier task. Because now I don't have to worry about saving any parts for later stages. everything is locked up and I can just whip out all my strongest stuff. Except there's no more importance to actually grind my time down more. So yeah, the real task and the hardest part of the battle circuit is just finishing the battle circuit. So I hope you guys stuck through this one. This is the longest episode of Gundam Build Guide I ever had to make because it had to cover the largest amount of content that Gundam Breaker Mobile has ever come out with. And oh my god, I can barely talk anymore. I'm burned out. If you want to see me do the next battle circuit, please subscribe to my channel. I'm doing live streams now. I'm doing strategy guides. I'm doing whatever I can to help you guys get through this. Okay, that was me, Gundam Buster Green, Ace Gundam pilot who defeated the strongest men in the world. Good night.